Hopefully you completed the last part of the tree set challenge, and maybe you worked through the bonus part of that challenge as well. Here I'm showing the slide for just the bonus part. The bonus part of the challenge required you to create a second method on the theatre class that lets an agent reserve a number of seats contiguous within a row. The parameters should be the number of reservations being requested, a range of rows from A to C, for example, for front row seats, a range of seats, a number greater than or equal to 1, and less than or equal to the rows per seat. Okay, so let's have some fun with this bonus and see if we can figure out how to reserve a series of contiguous seats within a single row. Our booking agent will let a buyer pick the number of seats they want to reserve. The buyer will specify ranges for their selected rows and their desired seat numbers. This will accommodate people who prefer to sit on aisles or in the middle of a row, for example. To start, I'm going to add another method on the theatre class called reserve seats again public. This time it will return a set of seats if the reservation was successful or null if not. It will take the number of seats requested, the minimum row requested as a char, and the maximum row requested another char. Then I'll have the minimum seat requested in that row and the maximum requested seat in the same row. The first thing I'll do is get the last valid seat in the theatre, getting the row identifier, the first character from the seat num. And if the max character that was passed to this method is actually larger than that, I'll just ignore it and use this character. So if the user enters Z, for example, and my rows only go through the letter M, I'll only look through M. I could do the same for the minimum row, but I want to include other validation. That should eliminate that scenario anyway. I'm going to do this with a validation method, which I'll get coded before I complete my reserve seats method. I'll insert this method just above the reserve seats method I've been working on. It will have similar arguments, so count, a first and last character, for the row range, and a minimum and maximum integer for the seat range, and it will return a boolean. The first thing I want to do is set up a boolean result variable and assign it the result of a logical OR statement with multiple conditions. I want to return that result from this method. In this code, I first want to make sure the min is greater than 0, because my seat numbers in any row always start with 1. Next, I want to make sure the users aren't trying to get more seats than I have in a single row. This method is only going to return seats from a single row. Another good method for theatre might be to reserve a block that includes multiple rows, but that's a challenge for another day. Lastly, I want to make sure that the difference of max and min is greater than the number of seats they want. In addition to these 3 validation checks, I also want to confirm that the first row they picked is really in my available seats. I'm going to set up another conditional logical statement, this time using the AND operator. If the result is false, because one of the first 3 conditions is met, it won't test the second condition. I've done it this way because the expression on the right is calling the contains method on a set, and that could get costly if executed numerous times. The second condition executes the contains method to see if the seat, and I'm creating a new seat here with the first row, and the minimum seat number is really a valid seat. If my result from any of these conditions is false, I want to print out some information for the booking agent to that effect. This is a more complex formatted string because I want you to get used to seeing a formatted string that uses argument indexes and $signs. I've shown this to you before, but this was another good opportunity to use it. It saves me the trouble of having to pass min and max as parameters multiple times. I'll also print something similar to what I printed in the reserve seat method, so the valid range using seats.first and seats.last to do that. Now I can call this method from my reserve seats method. I'll include an if statement and test the negated result of the validate method with the arguments passed to this method. If I get false back, I want to just get out of the method here and pass back null. Otherwise, I'll set a new local variable, a navigable set of type seat, called selected, and for the moment I want that to be null. Okay, so I've got validation, but now I need to figure out how to process this data. I'm going to loop through each desired row, so that will be a char variable, starting with the min row that was passed, going up to and including the max row. Max row was either what the user passed or the last row in the theatre, whichever was less. The first thing I want to do is get a subset from seats, which will be the seats in the row of the current row I'm processing. My min seat will be a new seat with the current letter and the minimum seats selected. This could be 1, but might be something else, if they didn't want an aisle seat, for example. I'm going to use the overloaded version of subset and make the inclusive flags true, meaning I want to include the seats I'm specifying here. The last seat is a seat in the same row, but determined by the max seat entered by the user. Once I've got my subset of seats, I want to loop through them, but first I'll set up a couple of local variables. I'm going to use an enhanced for loop this time, but I still want an indexed variable that will increment each time I find a good seat in the row, so I'll start with int index equals 0. I want a variable for my first seat in the reserved set of seats. I'm going to set this to null to start with. It will get populated with the first unreserved seat. I'll set up my enhanced for loop, naming the element current, and I'll go through the elements in my contiguous set, the subset of seats in this row, that match the min and max criteria. I'm going to check each seat in my subset and try to find the first unreserved seat. If a seat is reserved, I'll reset the index back to 0, and I'll call continue, which will just go up and check the next set in this subset. Once I find an unreserved seat, I want to set my first variable to it if my index is 0, meaning this is the first unreserved seat I've found. I'll increment my index variable with a prefix increment. This is so it gets incremented before I compare it to count, which I do here next. If these are equal, I know I've found enough contiguous seats to meet the requirement. In that case, I'll use subset again, this time on the contiguous set to get all the matching seats and assign that to my selected seats variable. I'll also break out of the enhanced for loop since I found all the seats I needed. In addition, I need to break out of the outer loop since I'm done with the work at that point. I'll do this with a conditional statement after the enhanced for loop that breaks if selected isn't null. Later I'll cover how to do this with loop labels, but since this is a less commonly used feature, I'll include that conversation at a later date when I cover odds and ends. After processing, I want to set up a reserved seat set, which I'll initially set to null. If my selected set isn't null, this means I've found good seats. I can loop through those and set each seat's reserved field to true. Finally, I want a copy of the set, so I'll create a new tree set and pass it the selected set. This was a pretty long method with quite a bit going on. If you don't quite get it, let me encourage you to set breakpoints and use IntelliJ's debugging option to run this code. Step through each execution and study how the local variables are changing as you go through the iterations of each loop. Right now I want to get back to my booking agent class and add another method there as well, called bookseats. This is going to be similar to the bookseat method but will have more parameters, so again private static void named bookseats. It takes a theatre, then a number of tickets, an int. After that, I want a range, so a min row and a max row, both chars. That's followed by a range of seat numbers, so a minimum seat and a max seat, integers there. I'll set up a local variable using var for simplicity and assign it the result of calling reserved seats on the theatre passed using the other arguments passed to this method. I want to again see if I'm getting data back, so I'll check if seats is not null and print congratulations and the seats that were reserved. Otherwise I'll print sorry, and that no contiguous seats could be found to reserve. I also want an overloaded version of this method, so if a user only wants to look in a single row, they can just pass a single row. I'll insert this above the current method. It has the same signature, except I won't have the char max row. That's the only difference. I'll just execute the overloaded version, passing min row in both the min row and max row parameters to that method. Now I'm ready to give this a go, so I'll scroll up to my main method. I'll start by trying to book 4 seats in row B only, and I don't want them to include B1 or B2, so my min will be 3 and my max will be 10. I will run that and see what I get. And good news, there were 4 seats available, and I was able to reserve them, B003 through B006, as you can see. The seat map now shows them as reserved. My next reservation wants 6 seats, either in row B or C, and again, for whatever reason, they don't like seats 1 and 2. Running that request now. I couldn't reserve seats in row B because there weren't enough contiguous seats, so it reserved them in row C. Let's keep going here with some more test scenarios. Let's see what happens if I ask for 4 seats in row B, anywhere in row B, meaning seats 1 through 10. The good news is that this request was successful. It ignored seat B002 since it didn't have any contiguous seats, but found the seats B007 through B010. Next I want 4 seats in either row B or C, any seats. So from 1 to 10. Running this code now. I can see this request failed. Neither of the selected rows had 4 contiguous seats at this time. What if I just asked for 1 seat next in rows B and C? Asking for a seat this way lets me reserve a single seat, but I was able to be a little less specific than if I just used the book seat method. I was able to reserve the last open seat in row B, B002. Let's try one with some bad data. I'll enter rows M through Z in this request. And that didn't work. I got invalid, the message from my validation method on Theatre. Notice that it wanted to use J as the maximum row, but it didn't do the same for the start row, in this case M. It's a lot harder to know where to begin if your agent doesn't get that right, so the code just flags it as invalid. Finally, I want to do one more test. I'll try to reserve 10 seats in any row from A through E. Running that now. You can see I laid claim to the entire row D for my reservations. Too bad I couldn't boot the guy that reserved A003 and give my 10 guests better seats. Maybe the theatre shouldn't allow single seats in an unreserved row to start. Anyway, that's a rule for another day. Okay, so this challenge used some of the methods unique to the tree set, or more accurately to the navigable set, such as last and first, floor, ceiling and subset. In the next video, I'm going to transition to talking about a different kind of collections group, the map, so I'll see you in that next video.